course, with James Bond. I think we all got a nice chuckle out of that. And she has certainly shown that side of her from time to time. Some great anecdotes, of course, about her rapport with various heads of states over the year. Maybe you can give us a little insight here, Guy, as to sort of what we can expect right now with regards to the recognition of her life, the funeral, and of course the succession that will come over the next few days and weeks.
The succession is already in place, Romain. It is King Charles. That is an instantaneous process. We will wait for the coronation to come after the funeral. The funeral, my understanding is, will probably take place in 10 days' time. And during the next 10 days, a series of events will unfold that will be a recognition of her life. She is at Balmoral now. She will go to Edinburgh. She will ultimately come to London over the next 24 hours. We will see Parliament being returned as well. Parliament needs to swear allegiance to the new king. We also need to see a vote on the new king. So that whole process, that constitutional process,
안녕하세요. 영국 여왕 돌아가셨네요. 1시간 전에. 그것 때문에 주식시장이 잠깐 빠졌다가 올라왔는데.
This is a bereavement for Britain. Britain is bereaved. This is kind of where we are in this. She was so central to all of us that there will be a huge outpouring of grief as a result of this. I suspect it may not be as emotionally obvious as it was when Princess Diana died. But this is a huge change. Let's not underestimate that for the UK.
96살의 나이로 영국 여왕님 돌아가셨네요.
To the state funeral that will take place in 10 days' time.
너무 충격적이죠.
The British monarchy has been preparing for this. It will be run by the Norfolks.
세계적인
But the king
지도자인데,
ultimately will have a say on what
이니스님
happens. He will have the
안녕하세요.
ultimate say on what happens over the next few days.
한
But certainly
1시간
this is a
반 정도
process that has been
전에 이
prepared
소식이
for over
나오면서
many
좀
years.
주식시장에 영향을 받았는데
Francine, I want to come
지금 좀
to you
회복을
quickly as
했네요.
well. As we think about some of the international reaction that we get as well, a UN chief, of course, calling Elizabeth Grace dignity,
소피님 안녕하세요.
dedication. We're hearing from the Irish president, calling her a remarkable friend of Ireland. We're hearing from France, India, EU. I mean, the list really goes on. What do you make of this
찰스
international
황태자가
support?
아마 계승을 할 것 같아요. 진짜 오래 사실 것 같은데, 그죠? 한라님 안녕하세요. 오늘 집에 있다가 이거 갑자기 소식 듣고 같이 보려고. 지금 뭐 블룸버그도 주식 얘기 안 하고 엘리자베스 여왕 얘기만 하네요.
With France, with Europe, over the Northern Irish protocol, there was always a sense, certainly from the French side, that the Queen represented something fair. That we never knew whether she was for or against Brexit, but she wanted what was best for her country, and she would always look after the interest of her country.
오직 영국만 생각했고 영국을 위해서 노력을 했다고 얘기합니다.
Said something about she wasn't sure whether Emmanuel Macron was a friend or a foe. This has, we understand, smoothed over and patched over, but at the time or back then, we could have imagined.
영국의 많은 상처들을 치료해 줬다고 하네요.
A quiet word, maybe, with the Prime Minister on that event would have probably gone a long way.
Francine, yes, indeed. And we're pleased to say, of course, Guy, John, Francine being here with immediate reaction. We also want to bring in now Frank Mort. He's Professor of Cultural Histories. He's currently at the University of Manchester, author of
맨체스터 대학교의 교수님 나오셨습니다.
I know that in particular you're writing about the British monarchy. Frank, this
영국의 군주주의 제도에 대해서 글을 쓰신 분이 나왔네요.
British people, that stiff upper lip that we all know so well.
Well, I do think a momentous chapter of British history has closed, and of course,
영국의 역사가 끝났다고 생각합니다.
And I would extend my sympathy to the members of the royal family, to the new king and queen. What does it mean? Well, I think one of the things we can do is go back to 1953, and then fast forward to today. And think about how British society has changed.
93년부터 지금까지 사회가 어떻게 변화되었는지 볼 필요가 있다.
1953, the end of empire.
1953년부터죠.
The beginnings of the welfare state, the rise of mass consumer society, youth culture, then the free market.
새로운 문화가 53년부터 시작되었다.
and into the problems of the present decade. The Queen has lived through all of this.
1953년부터 지금까지 거의 70년 가까이 영국을 이끌었다는 거죠.
Promoted very strongly the idea of change within continuity. So the idea that a continuous developmental form for the monarchy, which preserves tradition,
계속적으로 영국의 군주 제도를 계속해서 유지를 했고요. 또 변화도 가져왔다고 합니다.
Few examples of that. 1953, the coronation. There was no guarantee that it was going to be on television, and indeed, the Queen's better instincts felt that it shouldn't be, and many members of the social elite also said that. But she did it. She did.
Would be a way to handle things. So I think there was a mutual respect, and I think her influence in America was great because people respected.
미국에 대한 영향도 컸다고 얘기하고 있습니다.
And that she took over at the age of 21 in a war-torn time.
21살의 나이에 여왕이 됐다 그러죠.
She did, and David, 2 days ago, she made the transition of government when she was
over the death of Princess Diana. She came down to London. She sensed the public mood.
찰스 왕세자 이제 왕이 오르게 될 것 같죠.
Rather like her
찰스
grandfather,
왕세자도 되게 나이
George
들었는데.
V, is that she was very adept at gauging public opinion is the wrong word.
Yep.
The public mood. She had very, very sensitive antennae for gauging opinion.
대중의 이 무드, 기분에 대해서 굉장히 민감했다고 얘기를 합니다. 대중의 의견이 아니라 대중의 이 무드, 감정 이런 거에 굉장히 민감하게 잘 반응을 해왔다고 합니다.
The newly installed Prime Minister, you can see the lectern is out once again in front of 10 Downing Street. When we hear from Liz Truss, we will of course bring you her statement live following the death of Queen Elizabeth. She has only been in office for a couple of days. Professor, let me come back to you. This is a moment of change, though. We talk a lot about continuity and the fact that the Queen has delivered that continuity, an evolving continuity over the last few years. How different will Charles be? How different will King Charles be?
찰스 왕태자가
inevitably it's a different person.
계속성을 얼마나 유지를 해줄
So there are
것이냐.
going to be stylistic changes in presentation, in approach. I would rather suspect that there will be
계속해서 변화는 발전해 왔는데
change constitutional arrangements at all. I think Charles
크게 변화시킬 것 같지는 않다고 얘기하고 있습니다. 찰스 왕태자가 크게 이제 찰스 왕태자가 아니라 찰스 왕이죠. 이제 찰스 왕이 군주주의 제도에 대해서 크게 변화를 가져올 것 같지는 않다고 얘기하고
So I
있습니다.
think the legacy of Queen Elizabeth politically will be pretty constant. I would be very surprised if it is not.
Of course, because Frank, he campaigned for a better environment, global sustainability. The speeches have been plentiful over the years, of course. Education, opportunity for the young. I'm interested, Frank, from your perspective, on the global narrative now of as well, and the fact that indeed we do have 2.5 billion citizens under the Commonwealth countries, 54 independent countries voluntarily associated themselves with the
영연방 국가들의
of course,
국민들이 있죠.
14 other than the UK. What of the global presence of the UK now?
전 세계에서 영국이 차지하는 위치가 어느 정도 되냐고 물어봤습니다.
The Queen herself. Throughout her reign, she has been an internationally recognized person, one of the leading figures in the world for 70
국제적으로
years.
인식이
And she has
되고
been a
있는
focus
리더였고
for public attention in that way. She was not a natural, I think, in terms of what we would now say is media approachability, but she learned how to do it.
영국 여왕이 자연스럽게 이 영연방 국가들의 리더 역할을 해왔다고 합니다. 런던님 오래간만에 영국에서 오셨네요.
I think that commitment will be carried over by the Prince of Wales, but there is obviously movements for change across different parts of the Commonwealth.
전 세계 영연방 국가들의 약간의 이제 변화를 좀 가져와야 되지 않을까 그렇게 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
And I think also for the United Kingdom, how that will be negotiated. I think that's one
Thank
of
you,
the,
God save the
if you
king and
like,
long live the king.
one of the first things of
Thanks,
in the
XCV.
entry of the new king and queen.
And with that entry, Frank, I mean, we should point out that King Charles, of course, would be one of the oldest, I believe the oldest to actually assume the throne here. And there has to be some concerns here about the long-term planning, the long-term strategy of the royal family when it comes to some of those issues.
장기적인 계획이나 전략이 좀 필요할 거라고 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
I don't think age is necessarily an issue for the monarchy. I mean, the line of succession
나이는 뭐 별로 중요하지
is
않다고
intact.
얘기하고 있습니다.
And I think we've seen very recently, and the Queen has promoted this herself, the idea of a slimmed down monarchy which is focused on, well, now the new King and Queen, and on Prince William and his wife and family. So I think that will be a continuity of focus, probably with the wider kinship and family rather less prominent than they have been. But the succession is assured. It wasn't, of course, we should remember.
찰스 왕태자라든지 그 밑에 윌리엄이라든지 왕이나 왕비라든지 뭐 일단 승계에는 큰 문제가 없을 거라고 하고 나이도 크게 사실은 문제가 안 될 거라고 합니다. 찰스 왕태자가 뭐 승계를 해도 그 다음에 또 윌리엄 왕자도 있고요.
That she was the heiress presumptive to her father, the Duke of York. So she was catapulted into that role.
런던은 지금 조용한가 보네요. 30분 전에 소식 들으셨군요.
She was in her salad days, to quote from the Queen herself, when she was green, but she learned very fast. She learned extremely fast, I would say.
그녀는 여왕은 엘리자베스 여왕은 굉장히 빠르게 배우는 그런 사람이었다고 합니다.
The political sensitivity that she had and has had for her constitutional role. She was a good learner.
저기 헌법적인 역할을 하는데 굉장히 민감하게 정치적인 문제에 잘 반응을 했다고 합니다.
Prime ministers spanning multiple decades.
We don't know that relationship, and much of it is clouded in rumor and conjecture. Because we don't have the minutes of the meetings, often on a Tuesday evening.
화요일날 밤에 약간 문제가 있어서 모임을 가졌었는데 그 모임에서 무슨 얘기를 했는지는 모르겠다고 합니다. 오늘이 목요일이죠. 이미 화요일부터 좀 증상이 있었나 봐요.
And he waved the secretary away and said about racing mainly. That wasn't the truth, but we don't know the nature of those exchanges. The Queen's constitutional role is there to advise and warn, and I'm sure she has done that over the years.
영국 여왕의 역할이 어드바이스 이렇게 자문을 해주는 거기 때문에 그 역할을 잘 했다고 합니다.
Have let slip things that perhaps they shouldn't. There was conjecture in the 1980s about
Frank Mort, we must wrap it there.
리즈 트러스 영국 새로운 수상이 올라왔네요.
Is a huge shock to the nation and to the world.
리즈 트러스 새로운 영국 수상입니다.
Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign.
영국 여왕 엘리자베스 여왕하에서 영국이 잘 발전해 왔다.
Because of her. She ascended the throne just after the Second World War. She championed the development of the
2차 세계 대전 이후부터 이 자리를 차지해 왔고 53개 국가의 리더로서 역할을 해왔다.
We are now a modern, thriving, dynamic nation. Through thick and thin, Queen Elizabeth II provided us with the stability and the strength that we needed.
안정성과 힘을 영국에 가져다 주었다.
And that spirit will endure.
이 그 정신이 지금까지 굉장히 영향을 끼치고 있다.
It's an extraordinary achievement to have presided with such dignity and grace for 70
그런
years.
우아함과 이 디그니티를 잘 유지해줘서 좋았다.
Stretched beyond most of our living memories. In return, she was loved and admired by the people in the United
엘리자베스
Kingdom
2세
and all around
여왕은
the
모든
world.
사람한테 사랑받았다.
She has been a personal inspiration to me and to many
개인적으로
Britons.
나한테도
Her
영감을
devotion
많이
to
주었다.
duty is an example to us all. Earlier this week, at 96, she remained determined to carry out her duties as she appointed me as her 15th Prime Minister.
엘리자베스 여왕이 리즈 트러스 이 영국 수상을 임명하고
And she
돌아가셨습니다.
has touched the lives of millions around the world.
임명 엊그저께 됐죠.
In the difficult days ahead, we will come together with our friends across the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth and the world to celebrate her extraordinary lifetime of service. It is a day of great loss, but Queen Elizabeth II leaves a
아주
great
커다란
legacy.
상실이다.
Today the crown passes, as it has done for more than 1,000 years, to our new monarch, our new head of state, His Majesty King Charles III.
예, 킹 찰스 3세가 새로운 군주가 될 것이다.
We must come together as a people to support him. To help him bear the awesome
찰스
responsibility
새로운
that he
왕을
now
새롭게
carries for us
지지하자.
all. We offer him our loyalty and devotion, just as his mother devoted so much to so many for so long. And with the passing of the second Elizabethan age, we usher in a new era in the magnificent history of our great country, exactly as Her Majesty would have wished.
새로운 시대를
By saying the
맞이하자.
words, God save the King.
찰스 왕을 구원해 달라.
The passing of the
God
second
save Charles.
Elizabethan age.
king Charles.
King Charles III.
king 찰스 3세입니다. 찰스 1세, 2세는 옛날에 있었죠. 그래서 이제 찰스 3세가 되었습니다. king 찰스 3세죠.
One, of course, in which she's only taken the role in the last few days, really the last final ceremonial role of Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah, Liz Truss had a pretty big intro already. It just got significantly greater.
신지님, 효수님 안녕하세요. 부모님 안녕하시고.
If it turns out to be the
태강님,
case,
호프만님,
it is Charles
북한님
III.
안녕하시고요.
That is
보름달님
obviously a huge
안녕하시고요.
and new piece of news that we are getting. He has decided to stick with that name and will continue with it. Charles III, King Charles III. The Prime Minister will play a huge role over the next few days. She will greet the Queen's body at St Pancras. She will play a significant role in the funeral. She will play a significant role in the process that unfolds over the last few days from a parliamentary process as well. But
리즈
she will need to start a new relationship as well
리즈가
with King
장례식을
Charles.
잘 이끌
She
거라고
will want
합니다.
to work hand in hand with King Charles III to provide the continuity that we've just been hearing about, and it's going to be interesting ultimately
찰스 왕
to see how that
3세가
relationship develops.
찰스
And she
3세가
will play a critical
앞으로
role in ensuring that this
계속해서
process is as
승계를 하려고 할
smooth as
겁니다.
possible. Let's talk more about this and how Britain's role, Britain's place in the world
영국의
changes
역할에 대해서 한번
as a
얘기해
result
봅시다.
of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. We're joined now by Terry Haynes, founder of Pangea Policy, a political think tank. Terry, you have studied politics, you have studied constitutional politics, you look from afar as to what happens here in the UK. But this has been a reign that has interacted significantly with the global stage, with the United States. How does the UK's role on the global stage change as a result of the passing of Queen Elizabeth?
Guy, first, thank you for having me on, and my condolences to everyone in the United Kingdom and beyond.
상가 고인의 명복을 빕니다죠.
There aren't adjectives to describe, I think, the impact which the now late Queen has had for the past 70 years, and I think that leads directly into your question. There will be tire kicking. There will be an expectation that the UK might have a bit of a bumpier time without the presence of Queen
영국은
Elizabeth
엘리자베스 여왕 없이 약간 좀
I think it is
울퉁불퉁한 그런 상황을 좀 지나갈 거다.
past half century, just how consequential she has been, and I think that we find out she will be.
영국 여왕이 가져다 줄 영국 사회에 충격이 좀 있을 거라고 얘기하는 거죠.
To consult, to encourage, and to warn. And I think we will find out just how steady her presence was to many prime ministers going
영국이
forward.
굉장한 안정감을 가져다 줬었는데
By the same token, Britain looks a little more tentative than it did just a few days ago. You now have a brand new prime minister and a brand new head of state at the same time.
새로운 영국 수상이 나왔고 새로운 영국 왕이 나오니까 영국 사회가 조금 약간 불안정한 모습이 있죠.
Than his mother's back when at the end of the Empire days, all those years ago. And one that sees Britain's changing role in the world, and it is very much up in the air right now.
많은 것들이 공중에 좀 떠 있다 이렇게 얘기하고 있습니다.
The new head of state are going to have. I expect them to both work very hard to pull on the same oar, but by no means is it certain what's about to happen. And so there's a little bit more uncertainty today. About the British role in the world going forward.
Well, I mean, maybe you could kind of encapsulate, I guess, maybe what
G7 정상에서도 엘리자베스 여왕이 저 가운데 앉아 있네요.
I mean, we've seen the step back, whether it was of their own doing or whether it was forced by external circumstances. But this is still a nation that overall is still
영국 여왕
rich, is
원피스에는
still relatively
호주머니가 없다
healthy,
그러던데.
even despite some of the issues with Brexit here. What does that role become on the world stage?
Romain, I think the role of Britain as an important economic power and as an important political power continues.
영국은 경제적으로, 정치적으로 그 파워를 여전히 가지고 있다.
I do think that the Commonwealth concept. Generally, in the idea of a common British heritage, at least politically, gets rocked to some extent.
잠시만요, 저 손님 왔습니다. 계속 보고 계세요.
A lot over the past couple of years with Barbados independence, a few other events that show. Now independent nations pulling farther away from the crown. I would expect that to continue over time, and it is unknown right now just what steps that the new king will take to try to make sure that the Commonwealth is knit together and that Britain continues to provide both a political and somewhat a cultural umbrella around a very wide variety of nations. I also think that with the new prime minister and the new king together, Britain is in a very not difficult position, but I think a very bracing position in a lot of ways. New Prime Minister Truss really wants to focus on economic revival amidst a very difficult energy winter, at the very least, and had already started rolling those things out. Those all get delayed now by 10 days or so, and as much work, political and otherwise, stops in the United Kingdom to honor the late Queen. But I expect Britain to continue to work to punch above its weight, and I continue to expect that it has the intellect and the will to do so.
Terry, talk to us about how you think about this stability that the crown really provides. It was interesting as we saw the incoming Prime Minister, Elizabeth Truss, we were looking at pound weakness, the likes of which we haven't seen since Margaret Thatcher, also a female Prime Minister, of which also knew the Queen. How do you think about the stability that the crown can provide amid some of this maybe economic currency weakness, some headwinds on that horizon?
Well, the late Queen provided I think, an object lesson for any future monarch, Taylor, and one hopes now King Charles was paying close attention, as I expect he was. he is interested. He will be torn between two impulses, I think. He's interested in making his own mark on the monarchy, and at the very same time, as you rightly point out, the principal duty of the monarch is to emphasize and provide continuity as head of state. And he's had a long time to think about the intricacy and the subtleties of those challenges, and I expect that he will continue to do so. He will have his own views on many things, and he will provide those to the current prime minister and the succeeding ones. But at the same time, I expect him to fully embrace and try to extend Britain's role in the world as much as possible. His influence, I mean, to put it in the most basic terms, the king's influence, runs parallel with the influence of the United Kingdom as a whole.
안녕하세요, 제이캉님, 한율님, 동성님.
To extend and increase the UK's influence as much as possible.
제가 오늘 드라이어랑 와셔를 시켰는데 그거 오늘 오는 날이라 갔다 왔습니다.
Probably longer than anyone in
아버님 안녕하세요.
And I do instinctively expect him to be up to that challenge.
Yeah, he was indeed the longest-serving heir in British history. Terry, and an heir that now
지금 사람이
takes
왔는데
on an economy, something that we must discuss, given we are Bloomberg, an economy that has been, of course, under much duress, and a Bank of England coming as soon as next week that might postpone, of course, any focus on changing interest rates, on trying to navigate what is
지금 영국이 이 영국 여왕 2세가 엘리자베스 2세 여왕이 돌아가시면서 영국의 역할에 대해서 계속 물어보고 있는 상황입니다.
What you've got is two forces pulling against each other.
기억하시네요. 지금 드라이어 와시 오늘 받아야 되는데 그 집에 있는데 좀 문제가 있습니다.
Creating the energy cap funded with 150 million pounds. As well as the removing the fracking ban and doing some other, removing red tape and some other things, intent on focusing as much as possible on the immediate crisis before it gets too bad. And concomitantly, you have the UK continuing to support Ukraine and taking an aggressive
영국은 계속해서 우크라이나 전쟁을 서포트해 줄 거라고 합니다.
Everyone thinks it seems to be likely to raise interest rates in step with the United States Federal Reserve and
이자율도 계속 올려서 인플레이션도 잡아야겠죠.
So you've got a situation here where, on the one hand, you've got kind of the need for an easier fiscal policy, but on the other hand, no guarantee that the UK government is actually going to get that. So there's going to have to be a very delicate
재정적인 완화 정책을 기대할 수도 있겠지만 아직 거기까지는 좀 멀지 않았냐 그렇게 얘기하고 있네요.
To come up with a new combined monetary and fiscal policy.
Terry, you said something interesting a few moments ago. You said we've got a brand new prime minister, a couple of days in office, and a brand new king. Is this a moment of fragility, a moment of weakness, a moment of vulnerability for the UK?
영국이 지금 새로운 수상하고 새로운 왕이 이제 승계를 하는데 이게 영국의 불안한 모습을 불안성을 가져오지 않을까에 대해서 물어봤습니다. 찰스 왕이 찰스 왕 3세가 이제 승계한다고 아까 발표했습니다.
Are likely to be disappointed. As I say, the new king has prepared for this role longer than anyone in UK history, and
찰스 왕이 굉장히 오랫동안 승계를 준비해 왔기 때문에 그렇게 영국의 불안한 모습을 가져오지는 않을 거라고 얘기를 하고 있네요.
I think there's going to be a time where the new PM and the new king have to work out their roles a bit. And I expect that to go on for a few months. So there will be some transitional bumps in the road, perhaps both public and private. But I expect these two to work together. They're both veterans in their own way, and I expect them both to work together to pull on the same oar and to dispel any concerns of that kind. But yes, it is a moment where
왕하고 왕비가 계속해서 잘 해줄 거라고 얘기하고 있습니다.
At the top has gone, and and the world wonders what comes next. Sure.
Terry, let's talk just real quickly here about some of the logistics going forward. We talked a little bit earlier here about the process.
미국 주식시장도 1시간 반 전에는 좀 불안했는데 다시 조금 안정세를 취하네요.
The funeral itself. Do you anticipate that maybe we could see, in addition to, I guess, a pause in certain activity in the UK, that other nations around the world may also pause in remembrance as well?
I certainly think that's possible, Romaine. As you point out, a note that I put out for markets an hour or so ago, I mentioned that certainly there'd be politically the UK will stop for the next 10 days. Markets to some extent will stop over the next 10 days. As was pointed out before, the Bank of England is expected to come out on the 15th with their newest monetary policy statement and minutes. They may choose to delay that, but there's
많은 것들이 연기가 되고 약간 멈출 거라고 얘기를 하고요. 뭐 영국 중앙은행도 15일 날 금리 발표가 예정되어 있는데 조금 늦춰지지 않을까 그런 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
You may see some tributes paid in America by the New York Stock Exchange and other exchanges, as well as exchanges that are or have been allied to Britain. So possibly some delays in Australia, Canada, and elsewhere also. By the way, I note that the flags in the United States have been ordered.
영국과 관련된 많은 증시가 약간 좀 늦춰지지 않을까 그런 얘기를 하고 있는데 영국 증시만 좀 쉬지 않을까 싶긴 합니다.
Still waiting to hear from the U.S. President Joe Biden. We did hear from his press secretary a little bit earlier, basically deferring to the president and whatever comments he may have. We are getting word from former President George W. Bush, who did actually send out a statement expressing his condolences and sharing a very beautiful picture of the time
부시
where
전
he got to meet the Queen. We're going to say
대통령도
goodbye right now.
메시지를 보냈다고 합니다.
Pangea Policy founder here giving some insights on what's ahead here for the United Kingdom and its new king, as well, of course, its new prime minister who is just
새로운
installed
수상과
this week.
새로운 찰스
Talk a little
왕이
bit more about what's ahead. And Roz, let's just start off first here with your reaction to the news. Not necessarily unanticipated, but still a shock to many.
Well, that's right. Of course, the Queen was very elderly. She had been in subsiding health for some time. Of course, we saw her big Jubilee celebrations only some months ago, where she ended up having to
연세가 많이
some of that
들어있었다.
because she needed to rest and she was tired.
좀 쉽게 피곤해지고 휴식을 많이 필요로 했었다 최근에.
Of many years during the pandemic, a period when she clearly was in deep mourning, and so you could see that the Queen was slowing down. In recent months, she has stopped many of her public.
최근에 몇 달 동안 굉장히 천천히 일을 했다고 합니다.
Who ruled the UK as monarch for 7 decades, and news of her death is going to resonate heavily here in the UK. She was seen as a bedrock, really, during difficult times, and the UK is arguably back in difficult times, and her presence, as a result, will certainly be missed.
Roz,
영국이 좀 힘들지 않을까 그런 얘기를 하고 있네요.
Pointing this out a lot. You have a new prime minister as well as a new king, and inevitably a relationship, of course, that will need to develop between the two of them. What do you make of now a new prime minister and a new king as well?
Well, that's right, because of course the Queen only saw Liz Truss, our Prime Minister of the UK, a couple of days ago to sort of anoint her effectively as Prime Minister, and they hadn't had the chance to get to know each other very well, and now that's a relationship that will have to develop.
리즈 트러스 새로운 수상이 올라오자마자 영국 여왕하고 별로 이렇게 얘기할 시간도 별로 없었는데 갑자기 돌아가셔서 굉장히 영국으로는 어려운 시기이다.
Dispute within the ruling party, so she doesn't have a mandate more broadly to govern. We're coming into winter and some very difficult months here with an energy crisis.
에너지 위기가 지금 큰 문제이다. 겨울이 다가오고 있는데.
For wise counsel, the prime minister would normally go and see the Queen once a week or once every few weeks to sort of have a conversation, and that's something that we're going to have to see how that evolves between Liz Truss and the incoming king.
And I think it's no
notable that we have, of course,
앞으로
had
리즈
a statement
트러스트하고
from the
새로
King
찰스
and
왕과는
really being
뭐
posted on
협력이
Twitter,
좀 잘
a
필요하다
statement
이렇게 얘기하고
saying that the death of
있습니다.
my beloved mother, Her Majesty the Queen, is a moment of great sadness for me and all the members of the family. But he says, during that period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held. No more so,
말이
really, than in that
나왔네요.
moment
예.
of COVID crisis, when the Queen herself took to the
나의
National
사랑하는 엄마.
Airways. And in many ways,
나도 눈물
brought
나려고 했네, 이거
comfort to a
읽으니까.
nation. I'm interested, Roz, as to whether or not we will see King Charles and indeed the government be able to do that, because we know that over the course of the next 10 days,
정말 존경한다고
no news
얘기했습니다.
can really be coming from the government itself other than this.
Well, that's right. And of course, we did have a caretaker government, in essence, in the last couple of months while this leadership process was playing out. So no major new policies enacted. Liz Truss did announce some major energy policies here today before this news, which are designed to support households and business into winter. But that will
예, 새로운 에너지 정책을 새로운 수상이 좀 내놨고 이번 겨울을 준비하는 정책도 좀 피고 있다 그렇게 얘기하고 있습니다. 솔로몬님 안녕하세요.
Here in the UK for longer than expected. Of course, so the key really is that going into these times, as you noted, the Queen will be missing. And during the pandemic, she was a source of comfort for many people who were also isolating at home.
코로나 동안에 영국 여왕의 역할이 컸다. 사람들을 많이 위로해 줬다고 하죠.
Face of the pandemic, as she had through previous crises in the UK, and that's certainly something that will be felt again.
위기 때마다 영국 여왕의 역할이 굉장히 컸다고 얘기하고
During
있습니다.
her reign, the UK's hard power decreased significantly. Its soft power rose. Most notably, that shift happened during Suez. How important for the UK's soft power, the ability to
소프트 파워라고 그러죠. 이게 뭐 강한 권력이라기보다는 약간 부드러운 권력인데 이런 것들의 역할이 또 큰 면이 있죠. 나라의 또 정신을 좀 잡아가는데.
Of her life, she opened up the royal family much more to seeming their normal daily life, photos of them going around normal family actions. Of course, that lovely video of her with Paddington Bear during the Jubilee having a light joke over a cup of tea. So she became really much softer and more relatable to many people in the final decades of her life.
네, 지난 10년간 영국 여왕이 부드러운 이 파워를 가지고 사람들한테 많은 역할을 했다. 뭐 그렇게 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
On the global stage, she was a real counterpoint to that kind of narrative, which was often sort of more abrupt and sort of isolationist foreign policy. And so that's going to be the question: can now incoming King Charles maintain that kind of soft power? It remains to be seen whether he has the same kind of rapport that carries across multiple countries around the world.
찰스 왕이 그런 역할을 해야겠죠.
Really appreciate it, as always. Our very own Ross Matheson there, taking us through sort of all of the events to come. I want to get back down to Washington, D.C. as well to see how, of course, our own president as well as Congress, of course, reacting to the news of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. Our Washington correspondent, Joe Matthew, of course, is with us. As we see flags, Joe, at half-mast, how is your D.C. reacting to this?
Well, it's right now a clearing of the decks. The president was actually about to speak about something unrelated today. It was about COVID, as a matter of fact, COVID-19
코로나 관련돼서 오늘 바이든 대통령이 발표하려고 했는데
He was also
그것
scheduled
좀
to speak to a
연기했고요.
DNC fundraiser tonight. It's unclear if he'll be doing that. We're waiting for a
펀드레이징 하는
written
것도 오늘
statement from the
못했다고.
White House. There are a lot of protocols that go into writing a statement like this, but we did hear from the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, who said she didn't want to get ahead of the president, but our relationship with the people of the United Kingdom, and something the president has said himself, has grown stronger and stronger. She told reporters today in the briefing room, the United Kingdom is one of our closest allies. Our hearts go to the people of the UK, the Queen,
3차 대전에 대해서 어떻게
We've heard
생각하시나요?
from others, though, former presidents, and I want to remind everybody that the Queen outlived 12 American presidents.
일어나면 안
The first
되겠죠,
time she
3차
came
대전.
to the nation's capital was in 1951 as a 25-year-old princess. She met with Harry Truman. She grew very close to several American presidents over the years, none more likely than Ronald Reagan, who we remember watching horseback riding at Windsor Castle with the Queen. They were the President Reagan, First Lady Nancy
레이건하고
Reagan,
옛날에
were the first
엘리자베스
to
여왕이
spend the night
같이
there,
말
and they
타고
reciprocated
그랬던 기억도
with
있다고
a
합니다.
stay at their ranch in California. but she was very close to the Bushes. She was very close to the
예,
Obamas.
부시하고도
And
굉장히
received
친했다고
statements,
합니다.
very touching
젊었을
personal
때
statements
엘리자베스
from
여왕
both of
사진
them.
나오네요.
And I'll point to the statement from former President George W. Bush, who said that spending time at Buckingham Palace and having tea with Her Majesty and her corgis, he goes so far to say, is among our fondest memories of the presidency, Taylor.
Indeed, she was known for her love of her dogs, her corgis, the breed. She's of course loved for horses,
예,
for
코기,
racing,
강아지
for
코기를
really,
좋아했다는데.
passion, particularly when it comes to stud farm. And I'm interested, Joe, going forward, you know, a new relationship being built between new leaders of the UK currently at the moment, and a new king. Do we understand the relationship that President Biden perhaps already has met King Charles?
Well, obviously, they've spent some time together. I couldn't speak to their personal relationship. Obviously, Joe Biden has been in the sort of the
찰스
geopolitical
왕하고의 다른 미국 대통령들과의 관계에 대해서 물어보는데
chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So there is a little bit of a prelude to this. But of course, to your point, it's not just going to be the king. It's also the prime minister, who the president is hoping to meet along the sidelines at the UN. And I'm sure that we're going to see a very concerted effort with very carefully choreographed optics to have visits here to the White House and have President Biden
찰스 왕이 미국을 방문하는 거에 대해서 좀 이렇게 잘 조율을 해야 될 거라고 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
here, and of course whatever name the king decides to take, and I'll be very curious to see how that goes. But
뭐 유엔이라든지 미국의 상원의 Foreign Relations Committee, 자 외교위원회 같은 데서 이제 잘 조율을 해야 될 거라고 얘기하고 있습니다.
Of course, we've seen that from time to time, showing images there of Joe Biden. I believe that was back in 2021 when he and Jill Biden met the Queen, and of course those pictures of Obama and of course President Trump. Just a few of the names here in the United States that she has had the opportunity to meet. I am curious, Joe, when we talk about the U.S. protocol and I guess the U.S. respect for the monarchy and effectively the political system and the way it works over there in the UK here, there has been a great deal made out of this idea that despite the fact that we have our own version of democracy here that differs a bit from what they have in the UK, that there always has been a great deal of mutual respect, a great deal of allyship, even when we have had disagreements and strains.
You're right, of the people and for the people, as we heard the Queen speak to a joint session of Congress at a very special moment in 1991 it was, and she spoke to our similarities in government and actually was really
1991년에 미국에 와서 발표를 한 적이 있다고 합니다. 연설을 한 적이 있다고 합니다.
When she spoke to U.S. representatives. I've spent a good chunk of the day here reviewing her speeches and toasts at the White House, her address to the joint session. She was actually very funny and had an opportunity at that point to tell some jokes. I remember her visit from reviewing this from 1976, the bicentennial, Romaine. She was at the White House with Jerry Ford and said, you know, that whole thing that happened 200 years ago was not a bicameral event here. It was not a bilateral decision, but it's something that we've come to grips with. It was very easy to get a laugh, whether it was a joint session of Congress or a cocktail reception in the state dining room at the White House.
뭐 포드랑 만난 적이 있다고
the
얘기하고
celebrations, the
있네요.
Jubilee, the 70th celebrations. You want to know who performed live?
Who performed live?
Hamilton, the show.
The Hamilton, the show.
Yeah. We can find common ground over tea. I think we can definitely work our way through that. I think we have a certain affinity with tea. Let's talk a little bit about the statement that we just have from the president. The statement of President Joe Biden and the First Lady Jill Biden on the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Let me just read out maybe the first couple of paragraphs from the president. Her Majesty Elizabeth II was more than a monarch. She defined an era.
바이든 대통령의 편지를 읽고 있습니다. 단지 여왕이 아니었다. 영국을 몇 세대 동안 계속 이끈 사람이다.
An enduring admiration for Queen Elizabeth II united people across the Commonwealth.
뛰어난 디그니티를 가지고 있고 위엄을 가지고 있고 계속성을 가지고 있다. 영국과 미국을 결속을 지어주는 그런 동맹을 뭐 튼튼한 동맹 끈의 역할을 했다.
What does the British royalty mean to the American people?
Well, that's an interesting question, and it depends who you ask, and when you refer to the American people. As far as Joe Biden is concerned, this is something that's near and dear to his heart. He refers later in the statement to first meeting the Queen in 1982, traveling to the UK as part of a Senate delegation, and he walks through some of the more difficult moments that we have shared from 9/11, when she famously sang the American anthem, to the war in Afghanistan. Those are some very difficult days, very controversial days, and that helped to draw her closer to George W. Bush. But when you talk about royalty, the Queen specifically, Guy, has been depicted in Hollywood movies, has been part of sort of pop culture here. If you think about
할리우드 영화에도 선택이 된 적이 있다고 하죠, 영국
of
영화이.
hard newspapers, but it was also on the front
그러니까
page
미국의
of
이
People
팝
magazine.
컬처,
This was something that came
대중문화에도
into people's living
굉장히
rooms in a
참여를
way that
했다고
they
합니다.
really embraced her as a celebrity, as almost an American celebrity.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that real quickly too, Joe. I mean, when we talk about the guy's question and the relationship here, I mean, you have to remember too. I mean, the UK or
바이든
whatever
대통령이
it was called
버킹엄
back then,
팰리스까지
you're talking about
갔었네요.
a
저게
nation
버킹엄
that more or less
궁이거든요.
recognized the independence of the United States after the American Revolution pretty quickly here. I mean, we're talking about maybe a couple years time span. So whatever bad blood was spilled, of course, during that revolution, the idea that you had a country that was willing to sort of recognize this new country called America, called the United States, and that allyship, other than I guess the 1812 war, pretty much has stuck ever since then.
Well, indeed, it was John Adams actually who was our first emissary, if you will, to this to the old UK from this new country, America, and it was his hope to bring good wishes and reestablish relationships and humor.
존 아담스 오래된 미국 대통령이죠. 옛날 대통령이 영국과의 관계를 굉장히 돈독히 하려고 노력했었다고 합니다.
Advance that to your point, Romaine, in a pretty quick amount of time.
The old world, the new world. Joe Matthew, thank you very
옛날
much
세계,
indeed.
새로운 세계.
Very appreciating your comments from Washington, D.C. Joining us now for an exclusive interview is retired United States Ambassador Thomas Pickering. Among his many diplomatic appointments, he served as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations from 1989 to 1992. He met the Queen on several occasions. Ambassador, your thoughts on the passing of Queen Elizabeth?
Well, I think I joined all Americans in seeing the departure of Queen Elizabeth.
예, 통화가 끊겼네요. 안타깝게도.
Guy, it sounds like we're going to still be working on some of the technical issues underway. We'll make sure to get the ambassador back on the phone with us.
잠시만요. 저 수리하러 잠깐 갔다 오겠습니다. 보고
Guy,
계세요.
we're lucky that we still have you here. Walk us through again, sort of a day of deep sadness here, and again, sort of how you think about the next few days with maybe some of the government events shut down. What you're really going to be looking forward to.
I think looking forward to maybe the wrong way of looking at it. It is a process that we are going to go through, a moment of reflection, a process of understanding for the UK, an understanding that the Queen has gone, that we are now in a new era. It will be a period of reflection on her life that will ultimately culminate with her funeral in 10 days' time. Then there will be a process, I think, of trying to look forward. And I think this is where we come back to this whole idea that we have a new Prime Minister and a new King, both coming together simultaneously at the same time. A huge moment of change for the United Kingdom. I understand that we have fixed our technical issues with our connection with the former ambassador, Thomas Pickering. Ambassador, let me come back to you and let me ask you to continue your thoughts on what this means.
She will be greatly missed, and she was in many ways one of the key hinges that kept our relationship going. And I can recall when she came for her 50th Jubilee as service as Queen of England, I had the great honor of being invited to a garden party by the British ambassador, and she came down the line. And he was an old friend, and he introduced me in a somewhat embarrassing way. He said that I had had more ambassadorships than any current American ambassador, and she was kind enough to say, "Oh, interesting, where was that?" And I went through the 7 places that I had been an ambassador, and she looked at me with a long stare, and she said, "Well, that's certainly a lot." And I, in many ways, was pleased and surprised by both the warm greeting that she had for my wife and myself, and by her interest in what are the personal vignettes that we seldom get a chance to know about in terms of how someone in the exalted status of Queen of England will actually see things.
Ambassador Pickering, of course, a lot being ambassador to the United Nations, to Russia, to India, to Israel, to Nigeria, to Jordan, to El Salvador. I'm interested, Ambassador, therefore, at this moment where we have seen through her lifespan, Queen Elizabeth II, the end, of course, she lived through World War II. She then saw the narrative change, the global order, sort of the what was, of course, the Iron Curtain come down. And at that point now, then the lifting of it, the celebrations, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then now we see again, perhaps, geopolitics changing once more. You, of course, being ambassador to Russia at one point. I'm interested as to how much the role of the monarch can play at these moments, if at all.
The monarch's role is a very interesting one because officially it's not something, particularly in foreign affairs, that's very strong. But personally, it is enormously interesting and enormously impressive that the Queen of England, through her capacities, always to be gracious, always to be welcoming, always to be interested, always to be smart in her own way about international questions, always charmed the people who came to visit her from friends and allies, and I suspect even from folks who were somewhat more distant than friends and allies. And that's quite a remarkable achievement. And she had it in a way that very few people have ever shown, and had it for a very, very long time, and was in that sense a huge asset, not only to the United Kingdom, but to U.S.-UK relations in the special attention that she helped to build to how the U.S. and the U.K. are consistently closely connected.
Ambassador, it's been interesting all day long as we've been covering this. We've been hearing about what could be a tumultuous time for a nation, a country undergoing deep change. We've talked a lot about the new prime minister as well as now a new king. How do you think about the role of the crown in providing stability, but also walking that line to perhaps not become overly political as well?
But they have to, and I think the way in which the kingship, the queenship of the United Kingdom has evolved, have clearly avoided stepping over that line. And I think King Charles, if that's the name he chooses to go by, will himself be very, very cautious, one hopes, because he has an outspoken streak, some of it admirable and some of it occasionally getting the shoe too close to the mouth, so to speak. And he will, in that sense, be clearly tested in the coming months as to how and in what way he will conduct his kingship, hopefully very closely under what I think is the pervasive and very important shadow of a very successful mother.
Former Ambassador Thomas Pickering, we thank you so much for sharing your personal story, how you met, the exchanges, and indeed the thoughts going forward. Meanwhile, let's get some of the moment sentiment on the ground. A nation in mourning. Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden outside Buckingham Palace, where, of course, Lizzie, crowds had grown ahead of the news.
Indeed, and they keep on growing, Caroline. There are little girls with flowers. You can hear languages from all around the world of people gathering to pay their respects to the Queen, speaking to people here about what they'll miss most about her is her sense of humour, her sense of mischief. She was just so loved among people here. Let's take you back to what we learned earlier. We were told this afternoon that doctors were concerned for the Queen's health. Of course, she was at Balmoral. She had there accepted Boris Johnson's resignation. She'd invited Liz Truss there to become Prime Minister, but the Queen had been looking frail. And then throughout the day, as we heard, her family, her children, her grandchildren went to Balmoral. We had the notes passed in the Commons to Liz Truss and Angela Rayner, the Deputy Labour leader, looking sombre in reaction, and then we've had the announcement that Britain's longest-serving monarch has indeed died.
And Lizzie, you were outside a little bit earlier here in the day. Give us a sense here, I think, of what we saw with regards to the public's reaction even prior to getting the official word of her passing.
the crowds have been growing ever since we got here, and I got here on the tube, and I can tell you people were anxiously minding their phones. It was a real moment of anxiety, because I have to tell you about the significance of the Queen. This is a woman who led the UK from the age of the Empire to the modern era. She had served through war and peace, social, technological change. She's had 15 prime ministers. She's outlasted 12 US presidents. She'll be known for the 3D, dignity, duty, dedication. But her death really does come at a crucial moment for the UK. Of course, we've left the European Union. The UK's own constituent nations, Scotland, Northern Ireland, are growing in calls for independence. So really, this is the end of an era, and it will raise questions about the future of the monarchy without her, because for so many people, they cannot imagine a Britain without her. So it's a real moment of reflection here.
Lizzie, the formal process has now started, the transfer of power. What happens tomorrow? What happens over the next few days?
Well, the government will announce at least one bank holiday for mourning. Markets will be closed on those days. Parliament will gather to express its grief, adjourn, before later reconvening for MPs to begin swearing their allegiance to the new King, Charles, who is expected to be known as Charles III. Other legislators around the world might well follow suit. When King George died in 1952, the US House of Representatives also had a day of mourning. And the royal family will announce plans for the Queen's funeral. So that's expected to be held in 10 days. And on the 2nd, tomorrow, we'll have senior government figures meeting to confirm Charles as the next king. And then on the day of the funeral, it'll be a national day of mourning as well, effectively a bank holiday. Markets again will be closed. And at that moment, really, we will begin to look forward to what life will be like under Charles III.
All right, thanks there to Lizzie Burden out there in London. Again, updating us here on the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. We want to continue our coverage and our conversations of this historic moment, the end of an era, the Elizabethan era, and the start, potentially, of a new era. Let's bring in a historian who knows a lot about the history, not only of the UK, but more importantly, its relationships with countries around the world. Douglas Brinkley is joining us right now. He's a professor of history over at Rice University. And Professor, I do want to start off here with the idea of sort of that British Empire that we know has been whittled down to something that is a shadow of what it once was, though still a very wealthy nation and still a very powerful nation. I'm curious as to how you see its role in the world, on the world stage going forward.
Well, when Queen Elizabeth was born in 1926, Great Britain really was the dominant power in the world in so many ways. And it's not till 1927, a year after her birth, that Charles Lindbergh did his famous flight across the Atlantic, kind of bringing in the end England, Great Britain, and the United States even closer together. And of course, forging our alliance in World War II, Winston Churchill and FDR are synonymous to the special relationship. And so the Queen has been part of all this. Elizabeth was part of it all. She was on the cover of Time magazine way back in 1929. Yeah. She was the glue that held Great Britain, UK together for all of these decades. And so it's, when Dean Acheson, former Secretary of State in 1962, spoke at West Point, and he said, Great Britain has lost an empire and hasn't found a role for itself yet. It was a biting remark by Acheson, but in many ways, the UK, and particularly under this monarch, under Queen Elizabeth, really made sure the U.S.-British alliance stayed glued together, was the fist of democracy really around the world.
And Professor, part of that is also guiding tender and delicate relationships with her own prime ministers, 15 now of which she saw sort of go through that role. Walk us through that delicate relationship that she had with so many prime ministers.
Oh, it was very delicate because, look, by nature, somebody who thinks they should be prime minister has a very large ego. But prime ministers in Britain are transient figures. they're pillars that are going to eventually fall. Where the monarch was built to last, and Queen Elizabeth had to use finesse. I mean, she had for all of her privilege, there was a sort of honest, humble folksiness about her, and she understood power and used it in a way that was decisive, but also she was careful not to support whoever was prime minister to the best of her ability, right to the very end of her life. That's the case. And with American presidents, I mean, any of the living U.S. presidents, I'm sure, will be at her funeral. And that includes a rare moment of seeing Donald Trump with Barack Obama. She is that large a figure in the world. There's the Pope, and there was Queen Elizabeth as somebody who sort of unified people.
Douglas Brinkley, we've seen Clarence House in the last few minutes confirming that His Majesty the King will be known as King Charles III. How do you think America will get on with King Charles III?
I think they'll get on exceedingly well with King Charles III because the special relationship is more important than ever at the time when democracy's being challenged around the world. The American media today, the outpouring of affection for for Britain, the mourning that's going on in the United States right now, while it may not be on par with the streets of London, it's awful close. Everybody's tuning in, remembering, and realizing that somebody that was 70 plus years as this leading figure in our lives has suddenly vanished. But in a dangerous, ugly world with China with problems with pollution and Russia attacking Ukraine, the foundation of democracy remains the United States, Canada, and Great Britain staying united. So I think it'll be a new era of Anglo-American specialness in that relationship, both economic and political and also militarily.
Really appreciate it. Rice University professor, of course, Douglas Brinkley, taking us through just what has been 70 years of power, of news, relationships with prime ministers. Caroline, I certainly do not want to make light of this situation, but we had a moment before we went on air how we were talking about becoming financial news to now parachuting you in as our chief UK correspondent. Reflect on this moment as we sort of recognize you as our chief UK resident.
Guy and I are lucky to have the British accent that helps in these moments and an affinity with British tea, but it certainly is a moment that you reach out to your family.
죄송해요, 아직 수리하고 있습니다. 조금 이따 다시 올게요.
You've experienced, and Guy, I'm sure for you, an emotive moment to go back and talk to your children about.
Yeah, absolutely. I spoke to them a little bit earlier. They were surprised, they were interested. For them, they don't have the legacy of the history. King Charles will be their king.
All right, Guy Johnson there with us in London, Romaine Bossa, Caroline Hyde, and Taylor Riggs in New York, covering the passing of Queen Elizabeth II. We'll be back in a moment. This is Bloomberg.
Bitcoin in your IRA? It's possible with symbol GBTC. Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, the world's largest Bitcoin investment vehicle. Type GBTC into your IRA account to invest today. Grayscale, building the future of financial legacies.
I need to expand.
Sophia, honey, you should try delivery.
I know.
With Amazon Business, you can save on supplies and use that money to change things. What? I went to business school.
That wasn't business school, Frank.
You know what to do.
Yeah, I got this.
Millions of supplies at quantity discounts. Business will be flying. Delivery! Right.
Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying.
How will your business adapt to change? You could hire an office full of Peyton Mannings.
Okay, morning, Peyton. Hold for Peyton.
They'd huddle.
Welcome to the Peytonverse. Such a visionary.
Game plan.
You go. No, you go.
And call audibles.
Double our investment in Omaha. Omaha!
Omaha?
Omaha! 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 Omaha!
Or you could use Workday, the finance, HR, and planning system used by over half of the Fortune 500 for a be agile like an MVP world. Workday for a changing world.
Northbound investment by large Latin American companies is a bit of a new phenomenon. We're starting to see some companies, having already consolidated their markets, look to the US and Canada. One of the big differentiators is that we can provide the full array of solutions. We work seamlessly with our product groups in these regions. Scotiabank has a very unique bridge between North America and Latin America.
I founded Dantes Partners in 2006 to build housing for the working class families. Wells Fargo has done 20 developments with us. Over the course of the last 3 years, we've invested over $60 million in black and brown firms across our projects. Design firms, construction firms, and a host of other firms. I see that as my second act to educate folks
진리김님 감사해요. 예.
family and the community that you serve.
임시 국가 공휴일 만들 것 같죠. 예. 주식시장도 문 닫는다고 아까 그러더라고요.
But Freshworks makes software that people actually love to use.
그냥 아파서 돌아가신 거, 예, 그냥 자연사 하신 것 같은데, 예. 케이빵님 안녕하세요. 예.
Welcome to our special programming, where we, of course, mourn the loss of Elizabeth II, the longest-serving monarch, of course, of the UK.
가장 오래 영국에서 여왕을 하셨습니다.
70 years of dedicated service as the Queen.
영국 역사에서 가장 오랫동안 왕이나 왕비를 하신 분입니다. 1926년부터 2022년까지 하셨습니다. 21살에 즉위하셨고요. 묵념입니다.
Of course, that moment of silence being observed by the New York Stock Exchange to remember.
그레이스님 오래간만이에요. 안녕하세요. 감사해요.
We want to get more insight into what is the end of the second Elizabethan reign, as was spoken about by the new Prime Minister of the UK. A transfer of power, new leadership in terms of the government of the UK, new leadership in terms of a new king.
새로운 왕한테 찰스 왕 3세가 되었습니다.
What do you make of this moment?
모든 거를 넘겨주게 됩니다.
Is there any concern, any worry about the transfer of power in so many realms at the moment in the UK?
이제 왕권을 넘겨주면서 큰 문제가 있진 않겠냐 이렇게 물어보고 있습니다.
You know, we forget how long the Queen has been on the throne.
9월 8일입니다.
There are very few people alive today who remember a Britain without her as monarch. So this psychologically is a big break.
심리적으로 굉장히 큰 멈춤이라고 얘기를 하고 있죠.
Prime Minister Liz Truss just taken office in Downing Street, and she's now grappling with a new monarch. Now, of course, the transition.
이틀 전에 리즈 트러스트가 수상이 되자마자 또 돌아가셔가지고.
King Charles III, but again, a deeply unsettling moment and a pivotal time.
굉장히 중요한 시점이라고 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
In what sense?
Well, when you have a significant change in power, a significant change of authority, a a leadership that doesn't have the history that we have relied on of late in the form of Queen Elizabeth. We now have King Charles. Clearly, he has been assuming many of the responsibilities. We also have a new Prime Minister. Is the UK going to be able to transition from A to B smoothly? Will others perceive a moment of weakness?
새로운 A에서 B로 부드럽게 잘 넘어갈 거냐고 물어보고 있습니다.
It is, as you say, a moment. There is a moment of vulnerability there for her. She's going to have to run a government through this process of transition. That said, in historic terms, this is nothing like the changes in monarchs that we've had in.
그녀 많은 사람은 없겠지만.
So the government will go on. There'll obviously be a period of purdah essentially for the next 10 days. The government is also grappling with a huge.
앞으로 열흘 동안 많은 것들을 또 변화시켜야 될 거라고 얘기하고 있습니다. 잠시만요.
How is this going to hamper? Will it hamper those efforts? So it adds a complicating factor, if you like, to the situation.
And I'm glad that you sort of brought up the economics of this, because it was just a few days ago when we were thinking about the new Prime Minister, Elizabeth Truss, and some of the parallels with some of the pound weakness that we've seen within sterling that we haven't seen going back since Margaret Thatcher. How are you thinking about some of the currency weakness, the economics that you just described?
I think that to draw a link between the currency and the Queen's death is not correct. But I think what you have to look at is the more direct link between the currency and the market's view on the government of the day, and that is Liz Truss, obviously, and that goes to the question of her experience and her change of direction and her borrowing plans and what effect they may or may not have on inflation in the longer term. The question there with her, of course, is she's announced this program to subsidise energy bills to help consumers through this winter and businesses as well. The question, of course, is how is that going to be funded? And if it is going to require greater government borrowing, what is the effect of that on inflation in the longer term? But that's an issue about the government, not the monarchy.
Really appreciate your time joining us. Edward Evans, of course, joining us from our very own Bloomberg Opinion. Want to pivot as well and bring in our very own Francine Lacqua, of course, joining us there from the UK as well. Francine, describe again some of the moments that you're feeling and seeing there on the ground.
Hi, Taylor. Look, this was a queen that was loved, right? For decades, Queen Elizabeth was really a figure of national pride. She was, a symbol of continuity, of stability, and she was respected around the world. So this is something that will endure. The next 10 days, I think, will be extremely tough. They will be extremely moving. We'll have a lot of tears. I walked actually outside where I was next to Buckingham Palace, and it was like a wake. People were coming from all over. You did hear all ages with flowers. People were very demure. Now, what happens in the next 10 days? There have been leaks about some of the plans of the operation. This, of course, is also a constitutional concern. So that will be followed very closely, not only from all the cities of the UK, but from everyone around the world. Of course, within hours, Prince Charles, the eldest of her 4 children, will be, professional or formally proclaimed. Actually, I think legally he becomes king straight away. We see all around London flags flying at half-mast. And then this country will embark on this period of national mourning. So normal politics will pretty much be suspended, and we'll see a lot of more tributes flowing in from around the world, Taylor.
And Francine, when we talk about what happens over the next 10 days with regards to folks paying their respects, and I guess not only the formality, but I guess just some of the sort of the accoutrements that they sort of put around this, what can we expect here, particularly for those of us who are outside the UK looking in?
대권님
I'm always sort
안녕하세요.
of fascinated by some of the displays that we see when it comes to the monarchy and special events, whether it's a funeral or a wedding.
You're absolutely right, Romena, and this is what I have to say the UK does so well, and they always bring a nation together. Now, out of all the royals, when you think about the Queen's life, this will be one of the most spectacular, I guess, mass mournings because she was so loved. Now, by law, Charles, becomes king the moment his mother died. Then we'll have a formal recognition. We had code names, so whether she died here in London or whether she died, of course, in Scotland. I think think we'll have more details in the next couple of hours or maybe tomorrow. What we know is that MPs will probably pay tribute to the new monarch in the coming days. They will later swear an oath of allegiance to the new king. And there's something that, like speaking to people here on the ground, is that she, of course, was the queen to all UK, including Scotland. And when you have a new prime minister, when you have also all
영국하고 스코틀랜드를 다 대표하는 여왕이라고 얘기를 하고 있습니다.
Because we talk about a second referendum in Scotland, to possibly see the Queen or the coffin of the Queen, Elizabeth II, lay in Scotland for a couple of days, and so there's talk that this is some of the processions and things put in place for the next couple of days, and then of course on day 10, that's when we have the state funeral, most probably at Westminster Abbey.
And of course, you talk there of sort of the presiding over a fractious exit, the UK from the EU, and of course that referendum that we had previously when it came to Scotland. Do you think there will be some sort of reset, politically speaking, here, Francine? Or for now, of course, I'm not talking in the next 10 days. That is a day. These are the days for mourning, for legacy, for thinking of the future. But when we start to think of that future, is there a moment to think of some sort of reset in relationships?
Yeah, I think there'll be goodwill, right? So I don't know how long it will last, but I think
스텔라님 안녕하세요.
will mourn the Queen and the rest of the world will mourn with us. And that may not last very long. Certainly her legacy will endure for a long time. But this was a queen that, by the Constitution, could not say what she thought politically about anything. The one thing that people know is that she was very attached to the Union, the United Kingdom, and these nations. And so over the last 3 to 4 years, when we saw some of the fraught relationship between London
아까 이 여자분 나와서 말했던 것 같은데 그녀의 전통은 계속해서 유지가 될 거고 영국의 헌법도 그대로 잘 유지가 될 거고
Of course, I mean, politics will always be politics. So certainly I'm expecting some kind of pause and reflection. Because maybe people internalize what was dear to the Queen, and what we know is that was her country. She was dedicated and devoted to her people, and of course to the Union.
그녀는
Francine, can you
모든
just give us a sense of the
사람들한테
scale
정말
of
헌신을
what is
많이
about to
했다고
happen?
얘기를
You talk
했습니다.
about the UK being very good at these sort of things. We've certainly seen a lot of pomp and circumstance over the years. This is going to be a huge event for the UK.
영국에 있어서 정말 커다란 사건이 아니냐.
For the moment, it's almost difficult to comprehend. And again, I mean, this has been in the planning for a long time. The UK plans this meticulously. The Queen was 96. The death of the Queen probably came as a surprise because we saw only pictures of her 3-4 days ago. But people would have been working on this from probably the 1990s, if I'm honest. What we know is that on day one we enter a 10-day mourning period. There will be no government announcements. Flags will fly at half-mast. The next Wednesday is
54개 정도의 국가가 영연방 국가인데 호주도 그 중에 하나일 거예요, 뉴질랜드까지.
And then a little bit later, and this is unclear whether it takes a couple of days, it could take even longer, the Queen's coffin will be returned to London. We can expect also a huge pageantry around that. And then that will arrive at Westminster for formal lying in state. The state funeral, we understand, it's probably 10 days after. That will be a national holiday. The markets will be closed.
열흘 있다가 장례식을 한다고 합니다. 그때가 이 나라의 내셔널 홀리데이가 될 거라고 합니다. 9월 18일 정도 되겠네요.
Hundreds of thousands of people also lining the streets. We know that networks have been preparing for this for a long time. If you speak to anyone at the major UK networks,
이것들을 사실은 굉장히 오랫동안 준비해 왔다고 합니다.
So I'm expecting a lot of, very touching and beautiful scenes over the next 10 days.
Within that, do you expect a seamless transition? Any sort of big changes from at least what the new Prime Minister is calling him, King Charles III?
예, 새로운 왕계 계승이 자연스럽게 잘 이끌어 날 거냐고 또 물어봅니다.
What the UK do very well is prepare. So this will be difficult for the family. Of course, for us, the Queen.
아까 얘기로는 코로나 때 한 2년 정도 또 집에서 쉬고 이러면서 조금 건강이 악화됐다고 얘기를 하고 있네요. 저쪽 버킹엄 팰리스, 버킹엄궁 앞에 사람들이 굉장히 많이 모여 있네요. 영국이 지금 한 밤 8시 13분 정도 됐을 거예요. 해가 졌네요. 옛날에 저 버킹엄궁 앞에 간 적이 있었는데
2011년 in the UK and Europe writ large here. Give us a sense here as to how you think the public will react, not just to the news today,
사람들이 어떻게 반응하는지도 본다고 합니다.
King and I guess what it means for the monarchy and effectively for the entire political system in the UK.
So, I mean, King Charles's role, of course, will be heavily constrained, just like his mother's was. It's largely ceremonial. He will, of course, have to stay neutral in politics. This could be a challenge for
찰스 왕 3세가 이제 계승을 하게 되면은 정치에는 당연히 중립적인 태도를 보일 것이라고 얘기를 하고 있습니다. 그렇다고 영국 엘리자베스 여왕이 하던 거를 그대로 하지는 않을 거라고 얘기를 합니다.
Formally appoints the prime minister, but of course he's required to appoint someone who enjoys the support of the majority of the members of Parliament.
안녕하세요.
He won't get involved, just like his mother didn't get involved, Queen Elizabeth, with anything political or anything to do with the economy. But if he slips up, if he says something that could be construed as political, it's, you know, again, something that we haven't seen over the last 75 years. And
지난 75년 동안 영국 여왕이 정치적인 발언을 안 했는데 찰스 왕이 정치적인 발언을 할 수도 있다 뭐 그런 얘기를 하는 것 같아요. 그러면 안 될 거라고 얘기를 하는데.
But we'll see what King Charles III, as we understand, will be known for, will make of it.
And also, Francine, I hate to say it, we are business reporters and journalists. We are economics reporters and journalists. But many here in the US think of maybe, I don't want to call it gossip, but more what's on People magazine and the like. The fractious nature that's become between the royal family itself and actually one that's in some way international. Talk to us about whether or not we will see a focus, of course, on the private lives and indeed, therefore, the family relationships going forward.
가족 관계에 대해서 물어보네요.
I'm sure we will because of all of the focus that we've had over the last 2 years. Frankly, you read any magazine, you go to parties, and that's almost something that you are sure you will talk about in an arc of 1 or 2 hours. But I think the family and the royal family have to be extremely careful in these kinds of circumstances because we know that the Queen was loved. We know that she enjoyed popularity and almost universal support. King Charles
영국 왕가에서는 이번 사건으로 굉장히 좀 조심해서 행동해야 된다고 얘기하고 있습니다.
But not all of these nations still, love the monarchy as much as they have in the past. So it's also a challenge for the King Charles to make sure that if he's not loved like his mother was, he still commands, if not authority.
찰스 3세 왕이 앞으로 사랑을 많이 받아야겠죠.
By a rotating head amongst its members, and so we could see some movements potentially on that in the next, couple of years.
It's going to be extremely interesting to see how King Charles navigates this whole process. There is certainly an expectation that we are going to be seeing a slimmed down monarchy that will effectively focus on the King Charles, his son Prince William, who will now become the Duke of Cornwall. He will move into effectively the Duke of Cornwall role, and he will command or effectively run the Duchy of Cornwall. That will be the nucleus. And Francine is going to be really interesting to see where that leaves the other royals. Some obviously are going to be fairly comfortable with that. It's going to be interesting to see how the Sussexes manage that process. But is there an expectation that we are now heading for a significantly slimmed down royal family?
I mean, this is is what we heard, right? And again, the concern, well, not the concern, but when you're a business journalist, and of course you cover IPOs and everything that's transparent.
네, 진짜 영국 형님 돌아가셨습니다.
Of, it's not vagueness. Certainly, you don't exactly know what conversations in private the royal family has. So there have been leaks in the past couple of years that Prince Charles had taken the reins. He wanted to cut down some of the royals. He wanted to be much more nimble. He's also, let's remember, a businessman, right? Because he's 73, he's had a whole life of building, for example, the duchy, which is an extremely profitable, sustainable food business. The way he will distribute the money amongst the royal household could be very significant compared to his mother, but I don't know if we'll ever find out.
찰스 3세 왕이 비즈니스맨이었다 그래요. 그래서 자산 관리를 굉장히 잘했다고 합니다.
Thank you very much indeed. Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix joining us on the passing of Queen Elizabeth and what ultimately this is going to mean for the royal family. Crowds gathering outside Buckingham Palace. Let's get the latest now from Bloomberg's Lizzie Burden. She is outside the palace. Paint a picture for us.
Well, Guy, even though it's raining and the umbrellas are out, the crowd.
여왕 돌아가셨는데 비까지 오니까 영국은 정말 슬퍼 보이네요. 슬플 것 같아요.
Particularly moving seeing the little girls in their school uniforms with the bouquets of flowers. It's a scene that I was a child when Diana died, but that's when I remember it. And more recently, this scene outside Buckingham Palace was so jubilant for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, of course celebrating 70 years of her on the throne. But it's a somber mood here tonight. It's people of all nationalities coming to pay their respect.
그녀의 통치를 기뻐하는 날이 주블리죠. 예, 그걸 한 지 얼마 안 됐습니다. 근데 바로 사망을 하셨네요.
And what does the crowd look like in terms of size, Lizzie, right now?
Well, it's increasingly growing more towards the gate.
버킹엄 궁전 앞에 사람들이 점점점 늘어나고 있다고 합니다. 지금 사람이 많은. 이게 주블리 때 지금 사람들 환영하던 모습이었죠. 70년 통치를 기념하는 주블리 영상을 보여주고 있습니다.
I came from the Bloomberg office to Buckingham Palace on the tube, and everybody was on their phones checking the news to see how the Queen was. And then we had the tragic news later in the day.
Lizzie, what do you make as well in sort of the days to come when we think about the return of some of the members of that royal family from Scotland back here to London?
Well, we know
영국은 확실히 EU에서 나오면서 브렉시트를 하면서 미국과 더 가까워지려고 했는데 여왕이 안 계시면은 좀 이렇게 두 나라 간에 좀 이렇게 연결고리가 좀 끊기지 않을까 그런 생각도 좀 하긴 합니다.
Before later reconvening for MPs to begin swearing their allegiance to the new King Charles, he's expected to be known as Charles III. Other legislators around the world might well follow because that's exactly what happened when King George died in 1952. And then the royal family are going to announce plans for the Queen's funeral. It's expected to be held in 10 days. And on that day, it will again be a national day of mourning, effectively a bank holiday, and markets will be closed again. It'll be a moment of reflection. It'll be the end of an era, and then we'll look forward to the new era of King Charles. And of course, we also have a new Prime Minister. It's a big moment of change here in the UK. We've left the European Union. We're making our own way in the world, and it's really a big moment of change here.
A moment of change that comes with instability.
변화의 순간이라고 얘기하고 있습니다.
The train strikes that were due to be occurring. I think of the infrastructural pressure this will put on. This funeral, this celebration, this moment of mourning of a life, it costs significant amount to ensure that the right police, the right security, the right pomp and circumstances there to be held. What sort of pressure do you think that puts on? Do you think that's a coming together moment, given there has been so much division, particularly among those that don't feel that they're being able to be paid enough in these current scenarios of higher prices?
보안이라든지 안보 이런 것들에 걱정을 하는 질문을 했습니다. 리즈 트러스트 새로운 수상이 리더십을 잘 발휘해야 된다고 얘기를 하고 있고.
The contest to be the Prime Minister, Liz Truss showed her capacity for empathy. And you'll remember when Tony Blair stepped up to the plate when Princess Diana died. This is the moment to show that leadership.
다이애나 황태자비가 죽었을 때 토니 블레어도 그 역할을 잘했다고 얘기하고 있고.
The strikes are a symptom of the economic crisis that the UK is in at the moment. We've got double-digit inflation. We've got a recession on the way. Apart from this tragedy, it was already bleak times in Britain.
굉장히 힘든 시기라고 얘기를 하고
Lizzie,
있습니다.
let's just talk about the scale of the next few days. I keep coming back to this because I think it's as somebody said earlier, hard to get your arms around exactly what is about to happen. Hard to imagine an event that is commensurate with the scale of Queen Elizabeth's reign. What is going to happen? Just give us a sense across the country of what is going to happen here. Buckingham Palace is now packed. The area around Buckingham Palace, the Mall is now packed with people. I would imagine that those crowds are only going to grow, but there are going to be events up and down the country over the next few days to try and remember a queen that had such an influence. Just give us a sense of the scale of what is going to be needed here to do that.
이제 기리려고 하는데.
The converse of the joy that we saw for the Platinum Jubilee, and you saw street parties across
정말 우리가 기쁘게 즐겁게 보냈는데
people coming together to celebrate the Queen's 70 years on the throne. Now we will
왕자를
have
70년을 기념했었죠.
People coming together to mourn for the Queen.
이제 사람들이 다시 모여서 이제 함께 슬퍼하려고 한다.
To do that, and it's people of all generations. Children, parents, grandparents who cannot remember a time without her. She is so significant.
많은 세대의 사람들이 영국 여왕을 기억하고 있다.
A moment of reflection and such a moment of change to be without her.
하나님 안녕하세요.
Lizzie, finally, as we try to wrap up some of our coverage with you here, I know working so late down there on the ground, what are some of the moments that you're seeing, that you're feeling there as we are looking at live photos of a crowd that seems to be gathering and becoming bigger?
Well, what I can tell you is that the signal is absolutely terrible. So everybody here is just, it almost feels like we're in another era. It almost feels like time has stopped. Because
시간이 멈춘 것 같다고 합니다. 근데 왜 이렇게 비가 많이 오는지 모르겠네요, 저 앞에. 점점 사람들이 많이 모여들고 있다고 합니다, 버킹엄궁 앞에.
Everybody's got an umbrella and yet they're coming out in their droves to pay their respects. The palace is lit up, the fountain is lit up, and everywhere you can see people really trying to take in this moment that we knew one day would come, but it's really hard to fathom what now that it's actually happened.
Absolutely, and we're looking at those live pictures right outside Buckingham Palace in London as the crowd gathers there. Lizzie Burden out there on the ground helping us with our coverage, special coverage here on Bloomberg Television across the world. The death of Queen Elizabeth II at age 96, a reign, of course, it started all the way back in the early 1950s, ending today. King Charles, Guy Johnson, now taking over the throne, and I guess a lot of questions about whether his style will be similar to his mother's style or whether we can expect something different.
Absolutely. It's going to be fascinating to watch. He has a history of being outspoken. Will he change? Will he be a continuity candidate? Or will he ultimately take his own tack on this one? It's going to be fascinating to watch. The next few days, though, are going to be absolutely enormous here in the UK. I can't, the sense of scale of what is about to happen is going to be huge. I think we'll continue the coverage. We'll continue to talk about it. This is Bloomberg.
계속해서 여기에 대해서 얘기를 해야 될 것 같다고 얘기하고 있습니다. 아이고, 자 정말 큰 사건이 터졌는데 일단은 좀 안타깝고요. 예, 지금 신문에서는 어떻게 얘기를 하는지 한번 볼까요? 예, 아까 봤는데 자, 퀸 엘리자베스 영국의 가장 긴 통치를 한 군주죠. 오늘 돌아가셨다고 얘기를 하고 있습니다. 그래서 96세의 나이로 돌아가셨습니다. 1970년 동안 왕제에 있었죠. 그래서 오늘 월가 쪽에서는 그렇게 얘기를 했고, 아무튼 25살에 왕위를 물려받았습니다. 1920년대, 그죠? 그 아버지인 조지 6세로부터 왕위를 받았고요. 자, 그다음에 이제 이 군주가 되었습니다. 자, 이분의 영상을 또 월스트리트에서 만들었네요.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family.
서비스를 이제 하게 되었다.
For decades, Queen Elizabeth II, the longest-lived and longest-reigning monarch in Britain's history, was a stabilizing force during a time of change in the United
변화의
Kingdom.
시기에 영국을 안정화시켰다.
Her reign spanned the loss of most of the country's colonies in the years after World War II, and
2차
more
세계대전
recently,
이후에
Brexit and the
이 나라를
coronavirus pandemic.
안정시켰다. 왜 이렇게 내가
Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born in April 1926, the first child of the Duke and Duchess of York. While cherished by the royal family, Elizabeth was never expected to become queen. Her grandfather was king, her uncle was next in line, but in 1936 her grandfather died and her uncle abdicated.
So we greet England's new king, George VI.
Her father became king in 1937, making her first in line to the throne. Elizabeth's induction to royal duties began during World War II, when the 14-year-old made her first public broadcast.
첫 여왕이 됐고요.
I can truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers and airmen.
모든 사람들을 도와주기 위해서
In
노력하겠다고 했습니다.
1947, Elizabeth married Philip Mountbatten, Prince of
1947년에
Greece and
결혼했고요.
Denmark, and a lieutenant in the Royal Navy.
On the balcony at Buckingham, where many kings and queens have appeared, Princess Elizabeth happily shares the supreme day of her life with her countrymen.
The couple's first son, Charles, was born in 1948, followed by
1948년에
Anne,
찰스 왕세자가
Andrew, and
태어났습니다.
Edward. Then while she was on an official visit to Kenya, Elizabeth's life would change forever. On February the 6th, 1952, her father, King George, failed to recover from an operation and died at just 56
52년에
years old.
아버지 king 조지가
Elizabeth was
돌아가셨습니다.
flown back to London and immediately
케냐로
seated to the
갔다가
throne.
돌아오는 길에 여왕이 됐습니다.
The high and mighty princess Elizabeth Alexandra Mary is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, become Queen Elizabeth II.
The Queen was just 25
여왕이
years old
되었습니다.
when she started her royal duties as head of the monarchy. Even as Britain lost most of its colonies, she remained head of state of 14 countries other than the UK. She travelled extensively and was
14개
received
국가의
with
여왕입니다.
admiration by millions.
Mr. President, South Africa has a special place in my heart and in the hearts of the British people.
Famously fond of horses, the Queen's love of her corgis was also no secret.
코기를 좋아하죠.
They appeared with her in a much-loved video shown during the opening ceremony of London's 2012 Olympic Games.
007에 나왔죠.
Good evening, Your Majesty.
She rarely permitted interviews, so not much was known of her private life.
인터뷰 잘 안
But
했다고
this
합니다.
seclusion from the press changed in the 1990s. The Queen described 1992 as Annus Horribilis, Latin for horrible year. After Windsor
1992년에 안 좋았다고
Castle,
합니다.
one of the Queen's royal residences caught fire, and 3 of her children announced they were divorcing or separating
집에
from their
불났고
spouses.
자기
This included
자식들
the very
셋이 다
public
이혼했다고
separation
하고요.
of her eldest son, Prince Charles, from Princess Diana. people started to question if the royal family was needed and if they reflected modern
92년에 찰스
Britain.
황태자랑 다이애나도 이혼했죠.
The Queen came under criticism in 1997 when she didn't return quickly enough to London to share in the public outpouring of grief after Princess Diana died in a car crash in Paris.
파리에서 다이애나 여왕이 죽었습니다. 자동차 사고로.
She was an exceptional and gifted human being. In good times and bad, she never lost her capacity to smile and laugh, nor to inspire others with her warmth and kindness.
그녀는 웃음을 잃지
After this
않는
speech,
좋은
public
사람이었죠.
opinion started to turn in favour of the royal family. Following a well-crafted public relations plan and the marriages between Kate Middleton and Prince William in 2011 and Prince Harry and Meghan
케이트
Markle in
미들턴하고 윌리엄이
2015.
결혼했고
But just 2 years after their marriage, Harry and Meghan announced they were stepping away from royal duties in search of privacy from a growing
해리하고
media
메이간은
spotlight.
미국으로 와버렸죠.
They came to an agreement with the Queen where they would forfeit their royal titles as well as any royal funding. Their departure marked a watershed moment for a royal family that had long considered public service its foremost duty. In her final years, the Queen addressed her country and Commonwealth as it was swept up in the coronavirus pandemic.
예, 최근에 코로나 바이러스를
While we have faced
겪었습니다.
challenges before, this one is different. This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavour, using the great advances of science and our instinctive compassion to heal.
열심히 코로나 치료하려고 노력했다.
We are interrupting our normal programmes to bring you an important announcement. You're watching BBC News from London. A short while ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh.
In April 2021, Prince Philip, the Queen's husband of over 70 years, died at the age of
남편이
99.
필립
Due to
왕자가
coronavirus
죽었죠.
restrictions,
돌아가셨죠.
his funeral
작년에.
was a small family affair, attended by only 30 people.
코로나 때문에
There
30명만
were concerns for
참여했죠.
the Queen's health throughout 2022. She tested positive for COVID-19 in February and in June was forced to miss some Platinum Jubilee events to mark her 70 years on the throne
6월 달에
due to mobility
70년
issues.
통치 기념
One of the
행사를
Queen's final
했었죠.
acts was to appoint Conservative Liz Truss as Prime Minister, the 15th person to hold that
엊그저께
position
리즈
during her
트러스
reign.
새로운 수상을
The
임명을
Queen
했습니다.
will be laid to rest alongside Philip at the King George V Memorial Chapel in Windsor.
예,
Her
윈저
death means the crown now
궁에
passes to
묻힌다고
Charles,
하는 것
with
같은데
William next in line to the throne.
다음이
In
윌리엄입니다.
her 2018 Christmas broadcast, the Queen reflected on what had united her kingdom, the Commonwealth of 2.4 billion people and over 50 countries.
24억 명의 50개 국가에 걸쳐서 리더 역할을 했죠.
Even with the most deeply held differences, treating the other person with respect and as a fellow human being is always a good first step towards greater understanding.
우리가 다르더라도 서로 존중하자 이렇게 얘기했습니다. 내가 자 그렇고요. 네 이렇게 끝냈습니다. 감동적이네. 내가 눈물이 나네. 좋습니다. 자 오늘 방송은 조금 더 할까요? 어디 더 할까요? 지금 다들 이제 가셨을 것 같은데 아직도 많이 계시나요? 예, 아직 많이 계시네요. 자 많이 계신데 자 이렇게 오늘 또 방송에 와주셔서 감사하고요. 저 오늘 엘리자베스 여왕 돌아가신 거 같이 함께 봤습니다. 자, 아무튼 상가 고인의 명복을 빌고요. 자 여러분이 또 더 함께 화이팅 하시기 바라고요. 저 아무튼 내일 아침에 또 뵙겠습니다. 네, 여러분 안녕히 계십시오. 네, 가보겠습니다.